and I was never quite the same again. I'd suffered from low-level anxiety since about 2010, but this new manifestation felt like death was approaching. These panic attacks got worse and worse, particularly in professional situations. I would feel like I was about to die. On occasion, I had the physical sensation of the left-hand side of my face melting and the onset of a stroke. After consulting with my doctor, we came up with a course of action that involved giving up caffeine, nicotine, and other stimulants, exercising regularly, and trying to avoid panic-inducing environments such as concerts and classrooms. As this constituted my livelihood, it would be impossible in the short term at least to avoid, so I needed to conceptualize some solutions which would enable me to continue working without inducing panic. During my compositional process, after first devising a structure, usually a translation of some extant phenomenon, the material would reveal itself to me through working with pitches and patterns, suggesting what directions it would like to go. However, this began to become a problem, as I ended up with a very fixed idea of what a piece should sound like, and the performances never quite matched the ideal. Tempi might be too slow or too fast. Rhythms may not be quite exact. Interlocking patterns may not quite work. Intonation may be a little off. These were all regular performance things, but they resulted in panic for me, and the sensations mentioned above became worse and worse. Having identified that the fixed nature of my music was a psychological and perhaps physical problem, I decided to overcome this by embracing indeterminacy, or setting up compositional situations where I could not know what the outcome would be in performance. I have used chance techniques to determine things like time signatures, rhythms, auxiliary pitches, and passing notes, etc. in my music for as long as I can remember, but it always resulted in a fixed musical object. For this reason, it can be considered aleatoric. However, I had heretofore never written a piece that was indeterminate, where the outcome was unfixed. I began exploring this as a compositional strategy around 2016 and gave the first performances of these kinds of pieces around March 2017. I've essentially been composing in this manner since and find the results to be quite fruitful. In 2016, I saw a work by Michael Joaquin Gray called Object as Preposition, which you can see here on the screen. And I immediately became attracted to its musical potential. I began to devise ways in which I could translate the visual representation of the prepositions into musical matter. As I tend to work in terms of pitch relationships, I immediately thought of the object as a drone or tonic pitch, and the prepositions as things that can happen around the drone or tonic. Crucially, I would try to arrange the material in a similar way to the way Gray arranged his, and how they would unfold in time would not be fixed. In late 2014, I got my first synthesizer, a Teenage Engineering OP1, and since then I've acquired more and more hardware synthesizers. The reasons for getting involved with hardware synthesizers for me is manifold, but most pertinently, I prefer their workflow, I prefer their limitations, their interface, and I prefer all of these things to computer software. For the most part, I also prefer the sound hardware synthesizers make, and rather contentiously, I see them as more of an instrument than computers, which I have a hard time divorcing from mundane working tasks of email, Word documents, and spreadsheets. I understand that's a little bit weird saying that in a computer music conference or a technology conference. In the winter of 2016, I acquired my second synthesizer, a Moog Mother 32, which is a semi-modular analog synthesizer, when I began toying around with the idea of translating the object as preposition. I started performing my compositional sketches on these two synthesizers. Things began to fall into place, especially when I started sequencing material and performing live simultaneously. So armed with a couple of synthesizers and a primitive knowledge on how to use them, I began to start formalizing the compositional matter of object as preposition, being mindful that I would not fix the outcome and that it would be indeterminate. This trajectory would eventually lead me to a collection of pieces which I call Schematics Book 1. I found Gray's object as preposition incredibly inspiring because it seemed to me to suggest how I might arrange the whole piece on a single page. This reminded me somewhat of mensuration canons that were found in the 14th and 15th centuries, where a single line may have been notated, but would become heterophonic by performers augmenting or diminishing the rhythmic values of the line. This in turn reminded me of gamelan cipher notation of the Belungen, a melodic skeleton notated in numbers which form the basis of an elaborate structure that is only fully realized in a semi-improvised performance. So here you can see two examples of mensuration canon in the top left, and down below there's a short example of a gamelan Belungen with the numbers on top and then the colotomic structure happening below. I began to refine this working method of bouncing between composing and playing on synthesizers. I made a musical translation of Gray's object as preposition and sculpted the pitch relationships until I was satisfied with the results. This ended up with a score that looked something like this. So this is the full score for a piece called Schematic number 3. And I'll explain that now. So what you see from this example is a tonic or drone on the left-hand side of the page, just the A flat there, and 2 lines. Originally there was just 1 line, which was to be performed as a mensuration canon, but this was augmented by a bass line, and I thought the addition of some related material would add more interest and performance possibility. The bass line was created by simply following traditional voice leading principles. As mentioned, the numeric cipher notation of gamelan Belungens were an inspiration to the piece. This also made me think of Cornelius CARDEW'S TREATISE, because some pages have mysterious numbers printed on them, which are not prescriptive, and the players can use them in a variety of different ways. So here's an example. I'm not sure if you can quite see where you are, but here CARDEW just has 34, 3 and 1 kind of written above the kind of lifeline of this piece. And this reminded me somehow of the gamelan notation, but I wanted to use them in the same way that CARDEW does, enabling the numbers to be interpreted as anything really. They can create additional pitches, they can create additional structure, they can create a number of different things. So similarly, I wanted my pieces to have a sequence of non-logical numbers that could be freely interpreted by performers. However, I didn't particularly want them to be random. I wanted them to relate to the material that was already on the page. So I used the intervals between the 2 lines to generate numbers, which can be interpreted by the players in whatever way they see fit. Additionally, I used a kind of paradoxical notation, which both simultaneously contains long and short rhythmic values to indicate that the durations can be one or the other, or somewhere in between. Beams and stems can also be used as lines to generate other sounds or movements. I call this collection of pieces schematics because, like a schematic, the score is a blueprint for how the work should be realized with room for free interpretation. They can be performed by one or several voices, can be monophonic, polyphonic, fast, slow, textually sparse or dense, can involve movement or gesture, and numbers can be used to generate more compositional or performance matter than what is detailed on the page. In most of the schematics, I use the numbers to step sequence the pitch material or to generate more pitches. Video and text and lighting decisions can also be generated from the scores material if performers so desire. For example, I perform these pieces simultaneously with projected text videos. Importantly for me, I don't know what the outcome of these pieces will be when somebody goes to perform them. I have a rough idea of the sound world, but apart from that, I'm surprised by the results. This has enabled me to enjoy hearing music and performance again without the fear of anxiety or panic. And I'd now like to play a short example of Schematics number 3 with its accompanying text video. Okay, to conclude, I have a theory that many of Western music innovations have happened at the piano. Amongst many examples, think of Bach's well-tempered clavier, Beethoven's sonatas, Cage's sonatas and interludes for prepared piano, Musica Changes, Boulez's Structure 2, Anna Lockwood's Piano Burning, and many, many other. There is perhaps a hands-on DIY approach here, which affords a radical experimentation, initially at least in domestic settings, away from public or professional criticism. I haven't had a piano since I left home for university, so my private experimentation occurs on these portable synthesizers before being shared with the public. Moreover, it's through embracing a kind of indeterminacy and experimenting on these synthesizers that I've been able to overcome some serious psychological and physical problems to enable me to work again without panic and anxiety. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, I think you were first.
I really like,
you have to speak up a little bit because I'm a bit deaf as well.
the timbre of the synthesizers that you're using. They seem to really suit musical realizations, but it doesn't seem like there's an absolute necessity from what you've said for you to use them as opposed to acoustic instruments. Is there a particular reason that drew you to that as the realization of this idea rather than an acoustic?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose for me using them, it enables me to do it myself, so I don't have to fill out an Arts Council application to pay for an ensemble to realize what's essentially 16 pitches. So I can do all that myself. So I started kind of acquiring lots of different kind of synthesizers. I've kind of a big enough collection now, and I basically play on them. I still play with other groups and things like that, but I use them in this case as it was the first incarnation of this kind of way of working. So I was able to do it without having to go to other people to perform these things. I could perform it on piano as well, but it's more interesting to be able to sequence them and to have a number of different kind of procedures that are intrinsic to synthesizers. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Hi.
Just a sideways question slightly. I just wondered why you chose particularly that text to go with that. Do you have a way of choosing a text to go with particular sounds that you make?
Yeah, I work a lot with text projections in performance. Again, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been working this way. For this piece, what I did was I knew the date of the first performance, and it was the day after Brexit was announced, I think, the first time. And what I wanted to do was collect every noteworthy event that happened between the year 2016 and 2017, from the day that I conceptualized the piece, which I think was sometime in July 2016 to I think the 30th of March, I think was the first performance. And what I did was I took the top 10 search engine results of each month and took the text from the links that you clicked on the top 10 search results. You see a lot of horrific things. The first one was like the shooting in Istanbul outside the nightclub or inside the nightclub, where more than 30 people were killed. There's a lot of bombings, a lot of shootings, stabbings, all these kind of things. But what I wanted to do was draw people's attention to these things, but also the manner in which we digest information, because it's all determined by what search engines give us, if that makes sense. Yeah. So that the texts are not related to, in this piece anyway, are not related to the musical content, except for that they happened at the same time. Me composing it and the events on the text happened in the same time frame. Does that answer it?
Yes, I'm just kind of curious about how when you hear a particular sound, particular music, you're reading something, how one affects the other.
Yeah.
No, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like the kind of Cage Merce Cunningham approach, where the relationship is dictated by the fact that the two things are happening simultaneously, but compositionally they're not affecting each other, just how we perceive them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else? Yep.
Maybe I missed something, but what was the connection between the piece you just played and
Sorry, can you just speak up a little bit?
Yeah, what was the connection between the piece you just played and indeterminacy you were talking about earlier?
So the outcome is not fixed. You know, the pitches and the rhythms can be used in really any way you kind of want. So there's no, I don't know what the outcome is going to be. You could take it and you could perform it.
So when you do the performance, it's also live.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's not. It will change from before. I've done it a bunch of times, and they always change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt everybody. Could we keep the questions for the panel, because if not, we're going to run through lunch.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.